Welcome again, everyone. My name is Philip Gasatura, and I'd like to welcome you to the CLA webinar on repositioning business for growth in the wake of COVID-19. First of all, I'd like to ask and say a big thank you to the leadership and of CLA and the business advisory team for putting this together. Personally, I am an entrepreneur, and I am very much looking forward to today's topic on repositioning for growth. Growth is one thing I am excited about, and I hope you too, as you have joined. I hope from today's business owners and managers that you would walk away from here thinking about growth in the post-COVID world. What would it take, the different aspects to learn from, and a sense of, yes, it is possible to think of growth, even in a time such as this, as we are trying to keep our necks above the water. One of the things I learned very early on in my career was always look and find people who are smarter than you to work with you. And today, to help us walk through this conference, we have an amazing lineup of panelists. I won't say experts, as they said, but they are members of our community who have seen their fair share of what's happening and their interactions with their clients. And we would like to have a conversation with them. They want to share their thoughts and share them with you as you look towards growth in the wake of COVID-19. If you'll allow me, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to introduce the panelists for you to get to know them, and in the course of the discussion, if you want to direct any questions towards them, please feel free. Allow me to share this. I would like to share with you a screen to walk through who we have today. Today with us, we have Mr. Ben Michael Kiza, CEO of Victoria Motors Rwanda, with 20 years of business and majoring particularly in the automotive industry. He serves on various boards within the region. And one thing he is very passionate about is empowering young people to pursue values-based and relationship-centered business. Michael, thank you and welcome to this webinar. Next, we have Daniel Gasatura, a senior associate at Trust Law Chambers, a corporate and commercial lawyer. His particular area of expertise is in contracts, project finance, banking, and labor law. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Philip.
Next, we have Ms. Christine Baingana, a member of CLA, and serves on the youth ministry as a teens prayer partner and a teacher of the word. She also is the CEO of Urwego Bank. One thing she's very passionate about is financial inclusion. She's got several years implementing savings-led financial inclusion in many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Christine, welcome to this webinar.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Mr. Paul Frobisher Mugambwa, a director with PwC, leading up their tax practice. He has over 14 years experience within the sub-Saharan region, including Uganda, Zambia, and now in Rwanda. And particular focus is on advising various tax aspects. Frobisher is also a regular speaker on taxation issues within the region. And one of us is a published author. So Paul, very welcome to this webinar.
Thank you, Phil.
Now, to kick us off in sharing their thoughts, Paul, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on the theme, repositioning for growth.
Paul, are you there?
Paul, we need you to unmute.
Yes, I've shared my screen. Are you able to view it?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. Yeah, Phil, once again, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Also in a special way, I want to thank the leadership of CLA for putting up this event. It has come timely and it's very, very relevant under the current situation we are in, given that businesses are really having a number of challenges. Probably to start off, I would want to start with a quote from Albert Einstein, who once said that in the middle of difficult lies opportunity. And I want everyone to reflect on this quote, even as we go through the next 2 hours of this session. If for anything, if you do not pick anything from the session, at least remember this quote. Now, of course, it has been now 6 months since the pandemic kind of started. And what we've seen globally, that a number of economies have had to shut down so that they can contain this pandemic. And what we are getting from the International Labour Organization, they have estimated that at least 80% of the workforce has had to either work from home or completely close down their operations. And this is quite significant. It's quite big for businesses because we are seeing a significant hit on businesses. And we are seeing that governments are looking, and businesses have kind of looked at this in 3 phases. We are seeing that from phase 1 to phase 3, there's been a lot of drastic changes within the way the businesses are working. When we are at phase 1, we saw an immediate containment where governments came in and we saw businesses scaling back, or we saw businesses having their people having to work from home remotely, and probably even trying to stabilize the supply. But as the whole pandemic kind of evolved, governments realized that we cannot continue kind of shutting down business or shutting down the economies. And what we've seen is a coordinated return to what is being termed as the new normal. And whatever that means, we shall get to actually see how businesses will perform in there. Now, under the new normal, it's about stability. Businesses are not really pitching for growth, or they are not being very ambitious, but they're trying to see how do we work our way out through this particular situation. And this phase, depending on whether it's government or their businesses, there are a number of strategies that are being put in place. But significantly, what we are seeing, businesses trying to cost save. Some of them are rebuilding their capital. Those that were really hit, they are kind of trying to attract new investors. And also there is need for new suppliers or new materials to come through. However, whereas this phase is likely to take another 18 or 24 months, there's a critical phase that as businesses or government that we should kind of be very aware of and we try to project. And that's phase 3, which is going to be actually the new normal. At PwC, we carried out a number of surveys, and recently we carried out a pulse survey. And this went to the CFOs. And we're asking them the question like, how fast can you get back into business if COVID-19 was to stop today? And most of them are predicting that, yes, we should get back within 3 months. But when you look at the surveys, what is interesting and what is coming out is that people think that once COVID-19 is done, they're going to pick up from where they stopped and pretty much proceed with the way life was. But what is being predicted, that is not likely to be the situation. And we are asking, especially business, that they should stop being complacent, because probably we're not going to be working things the way we are doing them in the old normal. We need to look at new ways of how business should be performed. Within the new normal, there are also predictions of a resurgence in the virus, or even having new pandemics. So the question comes in is that as a government or as business, how do you position yourself to actually continue performing and continue growth within that new way of working. So we are seeing transition to new business models. Probably there's going to be a lot of positioning for deals. There's going to be a lot of change in customer preferences and businesses having different decision making influences what they are currently doing. At PwC, we've identified about 5 key challenges that have been caused by this COVID-19, and I can imagine that most of my fellow panelists will talk into some of these challenges. But the main ones are the supply chain disruption. This has affected both the exports and it's also going to affect most of our imports. And of course, it's affecting the way the government is looking at its earnings. We have impact on the supply of labor that has been reduced because a number of people, either they're working from home or some of them have been laid off. So we have got a significant talent that is being made redundant. There's, of course, uncertainty, which is impacting both decisions for consumers and at the same time for companies. There are policy reactions from government, and recently we saw it from our own government here, where there is a significant funding that is put towards the economic recovery. And it will be interesting to hear from Christine how this fund is really performing. Just go back to what I had alluded to, that in terms of difficult, you always seek out for opportunities. It's very clear that the government, under this policy reaction, is kind of looking inward, and we've seen the kind of funding they are targeting towards agriculture and construction. Probably if it wasn't COVID, the priorities would have been different. And also there are challenges around the sector partial lockdown. So all these challenges are significantly affecting household income, businesses, and probably government. So at PwC, we believe that all strategies or initiatives that either government or private sector is trying to put in place should be looked at within these particular 5 challenges. And if these challenges are addressed and properly implemented, probably we shall be seeing a resurgence, and we shall be seeing some kind of recovery within the new normal. But again, it has to be looked at differently. When you talk about labor supply and you have employees, you need to think about elements, policies around, for example, closing schools. If schools are being closed, and we hope they will be closed for maybe some time, probably a number of your workforce or people who are having children would want to continuously work from home. So there should be flexibility in the way you are dealing with this kind of talent. And any company that will have an hybrid kind of service will be able to attract more talent compared to the strict model of the way we've really worked in the past. And a number of elements that we shall have to consider. And I hope I'll talk more to these elements as the discussion goes on. Philip, allow me to stop here for my introduction, and probably I'll talk into the slides as the discussion continues. Thank you very much.
Robisha, thank you very much for that introduction and setting the tone. Certainly, there are several areas that we've all been impacted. But I'd like to maybe bring in Ben Michael to talk about your experience. On the group, you run a company within the automotive industry. Would you like to share with us some of your thoughts on what has happened, how you've been impacted, and some of the stories from the trenches that you could share with us in the audience?
Thank you very much, Philip. And Frobisha, thank you very much for giving that fantastic background. Yes, it's no longer normal. We've had this disruption in the business world, and that has really affected everybody, all of us globally. Philo, if you may just bring up those slides, that would be very good. Trying to make sure that I give a background on where we are operating from. Now, just looking at the National Institute of Statistics, Rwanda, recently released the first quarter, the performance of our economy in the first quarter. And something that is very interesting that came about was, as you see those statistics, COVID-19 has changed the business and continues to have an effect on the way we do business. I mean, the National Institute of Statistics in Rwanda showed us that our GDP grew by 3.6%. That was very good growth, considering that that was when we were actually feeling the heat as a nation and as a region. But you see, 3.6% growth is good without disruptions. But if you compare what we did and how we performed in 2019, our GDP grew by 9.4%. Now, that definitely shows that there's a disruption, there's a decline, and the decline is 3 times. That really should be a concern for all of us in the business world. So we're all affected. We're all affected, and we all contributed this GDP. And because we're all affected, it has disrupted us. So now having a decline by three times decline is concern, both in the marketplace and definitely for government. And so if you give me the next slide, please. My submission, and looking at what most scholars have given us, any business or any workforce in the wake of post-COVID-19, we will have 3 reactions, if you may allow me use that. They will definitely have, we have to have some response. We have to have some response because things are not the same again. We have had a drop 3 times. Everybody in the business world has been affected. So there has to be some response. And that response, I want to submit that it's not a reaction, but it's a response. And as I submit, a response is a well thought out action. And a good response requires an appreciation of what is happening around us and taking a very realistic look at our business environment. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to submit that we need to look at our business environment, and it's the business environment that will appreciate, that will guide us in as far as the response is concerned. Let's not hide our heads under the sand. COVID is here and continues to impact the way we do business, and we have to respond. It was Jack Wilshire, who was a very good leader of General Electrics, and he said, if the rate of change on the outside is greater than the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Now, unfortunately, many of us, me inclusive, embrace change when we feel the heat, not when we see the light.
True.
I want to pray hard that we better respond to change when we see the light than waiting for the heat. Because when the heat comes, it definitely comes and comes with its challenges. But gentlemen and ladies, when responding, we are dealing with the present situation. And allow me to submit that there are areas to focus on while crafting response. And these are short-term remedies. How has this affected our daily business? And I submit that while responding, we need to look at people first. Why do we need to look at people first? Gentlemen and ladies, it's people who build organizations. It's people who build nations. It's people who build all these conglomerates that we see around. It's not brands. It's not good products, but it's people. People first, people first, people first. Let's think about their safety. Let's think about their repositioning. Let's think about their survival. So in as much as we are crafting our response, it is important, critically important, that we think about our people. I'm proud to be working with a company that puts people at the center of what we do. I pray and hope that all organizations are going to put people at the center of what they do. They're going to put people at their response. In as much as you're working on your response to this challenge, let's put people first. Of course, it's subjective, but I want to submit that that probably is my submission. Now, the other item we need to look at is our customers. All businesses thrive because of our customers. Now, we need to look at how has this challenge affected our customers. We need to assure our customers. We need to be flexible with our customers. We need to engage with our customers as far as is possible. We need to engage with our customers. We need to engage with our customers. Then the third one, I like to submit that now things are not the same again. We need to look at cutting costs. Cost cutting, key business drivers in cost cutting. And I pray and hope that your cost is not going to affect your quality. Your cost cutting is not going to affect your quality. Your cost cutting is not going to affect your turnaround time in as much as you are cutting costs. Let it not affect your quality, the quality of service that you provide to your customers, the quality of service, the quality of product that you provide to your customers. In as much as is possible, let not cost cutting affect the quality. Let not cost cutting affect time. Now, when we do that, there's going to be a position where there's going to be recovery. Now, during this period of recovery, if you may go to, as you see the next, a company learns and emerges stronger. And I like to thank Paul. Paul mentioned it a little bit. During recovery, a company emerges stronger. And when they emerge stronger, they sort of start to focus on the cash flow. They start to focus on the supply chain that Paul talked about. Then they start looking at the regulatory taxes that Paul has alluded to. Now, that's very, very important because during recovery, and as you can see in the report that I read in May 2020, Deloitte put it that 2.9 billion people have been affected because of COVID-19. 2.9. Now, that means 4 out of 5 people who are in the workplace have been affected by COVID-19. COVID-19, I submit, has come as a challenge to us. And during recovery, it is important, very, very, very important, that leaders need to take advantage of this period. It could be an opportunity to introduce some long-term wanted changes. That is during recovery. And also, during recovery, what will be the competition and the size of the workforce required? Those are the challenges that business people will have to ask themselves. The other submission that I would like to contend is that because of this disruption, businesses and government leaders have been challenged to respond to the quick crisis and rethink their workforce strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has come as a global test, not only to governments, but even to the business world. COVID is a global test. It comes to test your governance. How good is your governance as a business? How good is your governance as a government? Is your governance solid? And if your governance is not solid, 9 times out of 10, COVID-19 will challenge that pillar. Governance, governance, governance. And all businesses, I submit, ought to now start strengthening their governance. And globally, COVID-19 has come to challenge the governance. The other pillar that I submit that COVID-19 has come to challenge are the social services. And that, again, it's for government. It will challenge the social services. How good are our social services? How good are our medical services? Now, for the businesses, the social services would assume to say, how good have you been responding to your corporate social responsibility? Have you been a business that has been in isolation without responding, without caring to its community? Gone are the days when we would work in business in isolation of our community. How have you been responding to your community? How have you been interacting with the community? It's very, very important. Now, the other pillar that COVID-19 has come to challenge is how good is your social capital? Now, when it comes to social capital, for government, how good are our people trained? How good are our people trained? No longer are we going to need the Americans, because the Americans also have their problems. No longer are we going to need the British, no longer are we going to need anybody. Everybody has their own problem. But how good is your social service? How good have we invested in our social services? Now, for the business world, how good have you trained your people? How good have you equipped your people to have and face this challenge? Now, lastly, on that slide, it is very, very, very important to realize that the recovery will not be static. It certainly is not going to be static, I submit, ladies and gentlemen. It will occur in a specific, for you to tell you that it will occur in a specific date, I have my reservations. So COVID-19 is unlikely to end suddenly, given the timing of the vaccine. Until the vaccine is definitely availed to the world, we definitely are going to face the challenge. Give me the last slide, and then I'll conclude this. In the last slide, ladies and gentlemen, I like to say a typical crisis plays out in three stages. We'll have to respond, and in response, a company deals with the present situation and manages continuity. It's important, very, very, very important, that we respond to make sure that we survive. We definitely need to recover. And during recovery, we are going to learn things anew and emerge stronger. And finally, I submit that we will thrive. A company prepares to grow during the thriving stage, and we call it the next normal. And the recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, given the human dimensions of urgent workforce challenges and the uncertainties, business leaders ought to think differently. They ought to think differently, and they ought to make sure that they do things differently. Thank you very much, Philip.
Ben Michael, thank you very much to both of you and Paul. I think what I'm picking up is a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly around cost cutting, talent, the long-term strategy, governance. I think I was on a call yesterday with a colleague over in Uganda, and one of the things you realize is even as some countries with the resources are unable to accommodate or start to handle what's the impact, I think it's really around, what I would say more internally, to what you point out, Ben Michael, the governance. How quickly are you able to organize? How quickly are you able to implement? And that's what has happened here in Rwanda, being able to manage and contain. I'd like to ask your thoughts, Christine, and just give you 2 minutes or so to tell us a bit more, give an intro into what is happening in the financial sector. Then I'll ask Dan as well. Over to you, Christine.
Unmute. Okay, I hope you can hear me. Thank you. It's a joy to be discussing the effects of COVID, and particularly sharing what this looks like for businesses. I know that institutions all over the world, and particularly in Rwanda, are all looking at the impact of COVID. And for the purposes of this discussion, as we look at the business, we realize that COVID-19 pandemic has led to a drastic change in all microeconomic projections, and these projections remain uncertain, given that the path of the pandemic remains unknown, and we don't even know when it will be fully contained. And recent data from IMF show that emerging markets and developing economies are projected to shrink by like 1% compared to the growth that was realized in 2019 of 3.7%. And so the baseline scenario, which assumes the pandemic fades in the second half of 2020 and the containment efforts are gradually relaxed, indicates that most of our economies in the emerging markets are going to reduce. And of course, as we all know, that the world inflation is projected to drop by 3% in 2020. So the current situation already shows that COVID-19 pandemic is going to have significant impact on all regions and most particularly on businesses. In Rwanda, over the last decade, the economy has experienced noticeable growth. But since the beginning of the lockdown, all high frequency indicators are showing a sharp decline in Rwanda economic activities. And therefore, what does that mean for businesses? The government jumped in to provide an economic recovery plan that covers the period of May 2020 to December 2021, aiming at guiding the government on required key interventions across the sectors, providing support to household and boost employment and businesses. In addition, from a banking perspective, as I talk from the financial services sector, the National Bank of Rwanda's policy response aims at cushioning the economy through a number of measures that we won't go into details on this call. I'm sure that everyone has been reading about them. And so in order to strengthen the financial system resilience and ensure that it's smoothly, continually playing a key role in the financial intermediation role, the central bank has put in place two key things. So one, the extended lending facility for banks, meaning that as our liquidities drop, we need to access to cash. Why our liquidities dropping or our cash in the banks dropping? This is because our revenues have shrunk to almost zero during the first 3 months when we provided grace period to our customers for non-repaying loans. Our liquidity also reduces because our expenses keep the same, remain the same as we hold on to the employment levels that each financial institution has had. So the lending facility came in to support the banks and to support the borrowers and increase banks' incentives to continue operating even in this crisis environment. I've just talked about the grace period that we provided to our clients, and this has increasingly enabled them to pick up the businesses after the lockdown was lifted. But nevertheless, given that most of our clients, I will zero in on some of the few examples, given that I have 2 minutes. Some of our clients used up their savings or even business capital to survive during the lockdown. And right now they're struggling with not only surviving as a business, but also making repayments for those that have loans. And so they come back to the banks and stories are like, you gave me a grace period, thank you, but I'm unable to reboost my business again. Would you please lend me? And so we are faced, the critical decisions that we're faced with on a daily basis is analyzing and assessing a client. This client has been a good client until COVID hit. They've used up their capital. They need to pick up their businesses. So they've enjoyed the 3 months grace period, during which time they barely had much businesses going. And so the question becomes, do you reschedule their loan? Do you refinance them? Or do you just simply restructure their loan and allow them to pay? So the questions that we're faced with every day is if we restructure your loan, are you able to pick up the pieces and continue the business? If we reschedule it, if we refinance it, will you be able to pay the first loan and the second loan, the top-up loan that we just gave you? And so those are the critical areas that we are struggling with in the financial sector. We also have other sectors that are not yet open for business. We have churches, we have schools, we have other public meeting places that are not yet open and that won't be open in the foreseeable future as we see the second wave of the pandemic. And so the question becomes, how much longer can you reschedule? How much longer can you refinance? But thanks to the government's economic recovery plan, this allows us to provide working capital top-up loans at affordable interest rates that enable some of these businesses to open. And for those that are not yet actively open, we continue to observe and watch and extend their maturity dates. However, as we all know, this is not good for business. Every time you restructure, every time you enjoy a grace period, please remember the interest is accruing, possibly even penalties. And in the future, the burden to pay that loan becomes even higher. And so what has this crisis done for us? What has it done for businesses? It has made it incredibly difficult for businesses to survive, for businesses to expand and grow. Expanding and growing is even a foreign concept right now. We know that most businesses are just looking to survive, and so are the banks. We're also looking to survive. We're looking to make sure that our provisions for this year can be covered by the growing business in 2021. And so the dilemma remains, you keep giving loans so that 2021 provides greater revenue towards profitability, or do you actually stop giving loans so that people are not overburdened? So that's a crisis mode that we manage on a daily basis. And for some, we restructure, reschedule, and refinance. For others, we kindly ask them to just hang in there, to wait for COVID, the impact of COVID to end, or even at least for the crisis to come to a stop, where we begin to see a growth, or at least an upward movement of most of the sectors in the country. So we think about individual businesses, we think about business people in CLA, church members, or even anyone else that is calling in today. We think about your businesses, and today, given your questions, we want to respond and share some of the insights that we have seen, as we are businesses ourselves, and we are also struggling in the same crisis. But I hope that we'll be able to add value to what you already know, add value to what you're already doing, or even improve on what your thought process has been. Thank you for this opportunity.
Christine, thank you very much for insight onto the financial sector. I think I'll come back to you later on with some questions really around the recovery fund and what that means for businesses. Because from what you say and what I pick up is it's a band-aid for now. We're pushing things down the road. But does this give us opportunity as businesses to figure out how to grow within this one? Because one of the things you mentioned is asking some of the companies to hold on. How long can they hold on? Does that mean that we might have or see some bankruptcies coming along the way? How do businesses start to reposition for that? But let me ask Daniel to come in. Daniel, just give us a 2 minutes, 3 minutes synopsis of what's happening around contracts. I remember the very start of the COVID lockdown, one of the biggest areas of tension was between landlords and tenants. That was a big issue. Around labor laws, how do I let go my staff? What does that look like? Just give us a snippet and we can get into some of the questions later on in the conversation.
All right, thank you very much, Philip. You're indeed very right that at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, we had a lot of issues to do with contract terminations, contract suspensions, both for human resource, both for employment as well as business contracts as well. I think the issue of force majeure has become a very known thing to very many businessmen right now, because many businesses were not able to function, and yet they were already having running contracts, and there was a lot of questions about how do we get out of this right now. We have obligations for the next 5 years, but we cannot continue, and it gets also a bit more confusing because many of these contracts are sort of things that you just can't stop. Or I'll just give you an example of a client who had won a tender to supply some technological equipment for a client of his, and the client had already made a down payment, and now he had already ordered for the equipment from China and had a period of, I think, a month to deliver. and then, you know, the lockdown hit and nothing could get delivered to him initially, because his suppliers were not able to work. And so there was a question about, I've already paid this money to my supplier, so I can't give it back and, you know, just, you know, terminate the contract as though it never happened. What do we do now? And this has gone on in very many sectors. We have some construction clients who were stuck with a contract that was midway, but the company was really hit. And the client realized, I cannot go into the market right now to get someone to conclude this contract because it's going to be very expensive for me right now. So both parties were really struggling. And what we've seen is parties have had to come to the table and talk about how can we make this continue. Basically, you have to agree on totally new terms that without COVID, you would never have agreed upon. We've seen them trying to agree to, okay, your expats are not in the country, they were locked out of the country. Can you just get us Rwandan expats? We know at the beginning of the contract, we insisted on international expats because the work was sophisticated, but now we just have to get this, you know, so there's people making concessions on different sides, and we've had to see that. There was a big issue to do with rental contracts with the owners of buildings who had loans, of course, most of them with the Christians and stuff, still need to get their loans paid, but the tenants do not have business anymore and they need to get out of the house. So yes, we've had to use the force majeure clause a lot, meaning if there's something that has come upon the contract that does not allow the contract to continue, that is neither fault of either party, you know, both parties just have to either agree on new terms that can work, or they just have to agree to terminate the contract without either party having liability for it. In terms of human resource, we've also seen a large number initially of suspensions of contracts, but our labor law provides for a maximum of 3 months of suspension. And so now we are beyond the 3-month date, and many now have to terminate these contracts, especially for you know, businesses that are still not functioning, the education sector, until very recently the hotels. How do you treat how do you take the suspension into termination, as well as changing people's contracts for companies that had contracts that you know, needed employees to work at a particular location. Now that has been overridden by, you know, by government requirements for people to work at home. How do you treat that? And yes, those are the big issues we are seeing in the legal aspect right now. Thank you, Philip.
Pointing out some of the challenges that were faced early on in the contracts, especially with some of the suppliers, with the contractors, with employees. I think I'll come back to you later with some questions that are coming in online, but particularly around what does that mean for liabilities for employees, for employers? What does that mean for in new changing labor laws? Currently, our labor laws, we don't yet have the flexibility of per hour shifts where people can work at various locations. So I'll come back to you later on. But maybe before I get on, there are a couple of questions we've got lined up for the panelists. And maybe before I kick off, there are some that are coming online. To the audience, would like to make this webinar as interactive as possible. And so if you do have some, if you've already got an idea or seen the direction where the conversation is going, kindly post your questions on the YouTube chat, and we will bring them to the attention of the panelists. I do encourage you, and I do promise that we'll work with the team here to bring as many of them to the panelists. Maybe to kick off in some areas, I'll come back to you, Ben Michael. You're in business, and some of the issues that have been really impacting us the world over is the supply chains. Could you share some bit of light on that? How do you identify some of the broken links? If I'm a retailer and I've got a span of different locations, How do I understand my supply chain? Can I now move from my international supply chain to a local one? What does that context mean? How have you been impacted, and how do you answer that for some of the businesses online, particularly around supply chain?
Thank you very much, Philip. Now, supply chain, as it were, it has been globally disrupted. And your point was to say that do we look at the local supply chain as compared to the global supply chain? This is
Correct.
how I would comment. In the first place, your supply line has been identified in such a way that it fits into what you are doing. Thankfully, and I want to say thankfully with caution, COVID has not spared anyone. All of us globally have been affected. And so in my submission, when I talked about a response, that's what I meant by saying, how do you respond? All right. And a response calls for planning. You respond, you don't react, you respond. And 9 times out of 10, planning is the art of the game. And you don't plan alone. You don't plan in isolation. You plan with your business partners. And the minute you plan with your business partners, the strength of your relationship with your business partners is 9 times out of 10 going to help you handle the disruption of supply chain. So I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that relationship, how well do you relate with your business partners? Because they too are disrupted, you too are disrupted, all right? Now, if they are disrupted and you're disrupted, and the line of communication is alive and kicking between the two of you, you definitely will respond to the challenges that come along. Now, you know that the final person is the valued customer. Again, like I mentioned, your engagement, your interaction, your communication lines with the customer as well is also going to help you to handle the challenge that you have with your supply partner. So again, as I finish, relationship, communication, and the way you plan the response. Do not react, plan the response. And don't plan in isolation, plan with your partner. Thank you. I hope Philip addressed the question.
Yes, thank you. Frobisher, I'd like you to come in here. A lot of supply chains pre-COVID, we were looking at just in time. We held enough inventory for our businesses because we were guaranteed a supply chain. Now, in this case here, as I move into, it's coming out post-COVID and I'm looking at growth, how would having more inventory, now that affects my working capital. How does that impact me? How does that impact my cash, my revenues as well, my profitability? Just walk us through what that is like for businesses and how, as they plan, as Ben Michael talked about earlier, in terms of planning with the partners.
Yeah, I think you put it right, that in the past, if you are using models like JIT, just in time, this is significantly changing. You cannot use just in time to kind of feed your production lines. It means that now you either have to hold a lot of stock, and if you have to hold out of stock, that means that you need to think about warehousing. In the past, probably you had a very small portion where to house these particular products. But given that your lead time between the time when you order for a number of these inputs to the time when they are fed into your production line, it has almost kind of increased. So it means you need to have a lot of stock held. That will turn into having more space for warehousing, and definitely that's a cost to you. So you need to think very, very carefully. And that's where then you kind of think about, is whatever I was importing, do I have a local alternative? And when I say that, we are seeing COVID-19 presenting certain opportunities, yes, both for government and businesses. So government has realized that I need to look inward and you're seeing a lot of spending going into made in Rwanda policies are being kind of relooked at. Manufacturers are being kind of given incentives. We are seeing a lot happening in the industry zone. Why? Is it possible that we can get local substitute for whatever we are importing? If you look at the projection for construction sector, it has been one of the fastest growing sector in the country. Government expects that it's going to grow at 4% this year. And just imagine from 35%, it drops almost to 4%. But that is largely influenced by the fact that where are we going to get the local materials? Where are we going to get the materials? And if we can't continue importing, how do we get business people? How do we get private sector to start producing locally? So the situation is kind of presenting an opportunity for the private sector. Does the private sector have capacity to try to feed these industries? Probably no. But is there room for consortium arrangements whereby in the past I used to work alone, but probably if we go into a consortium, we can actually feed a particular developer. And that's a thinking around all these elements of supply chain, and that will go to any product that you're talking about. Let's be raw materials, let's be construction sector, let's be even services that we are seeing a lot of consolidation that has to happen because of the situation, so that the economy can kind of kickstart. So there's a lot of rethinking that's going to happen from both the government side and private sector side. So I think it's wrong for us to think that if COVID-19 stopped today, I'll pick up from where I started. We need to kind of think through different models of delivering certain aspects.
Thank you, Frobisher. Maybe I'd like to bring in a question from the audience here, a comment from Dawson. Based on the statistics, agriculture is the hope of recovery of this crisis for the nation, but mostly banks seem not to be open enough to invest in it as it is high risk. Christine, you're in the banking sector. You know the challenges faced by the banks. How do you address this to some of the SMEs where agriculture is the biggest employer? Could you just shed light on this? How would banks be looking at changing their business model? Is there room for that to allow for this kind of growth?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. The person who asked the question is spot on. Agriculture is one of the key pillars of Rwanda's economy, and most of the emerging markets, at least in Africa. The greatest proportion of our population is employed in agriculture, whether it is subsistence agriculture or commercial. Looking at the measures that, for example, the government of Rwanda has been putting in place, it's becoming the initiatives that the government has put in place is de-risking investment in the agriculture sector. So I wouldn't be surprised seeing more banks, more financial institutions investing or lending into agriculture products. Some of the initiatives put in place are like crop insurance. The government has had an institution that clearly looks at individual crops. There's a full assessment, research, and study done on these crops and the type of seeds and the types of fertilizers that are conducive for greater growth. And that has been in place for quite a number of years. And so as banks move into lending, agriculture lending, we know which products to go for, we know which crops, we know what fertilizers and what seeds that can be financed. So that is one aspect of de-risking in agriculture lending. Number two has been partnerships, strategic partnerships with international organizations that have greater insight into better agriculture, like Farming Made Easy, like technology in farming. All these are initiatives that are being brought to the market to enable the banking sector and the financial sector to provide lending into agriculture. The key component in agriculture lending, as Urwego Bank, speaking personally, as Urwego Bank, our biggest portfolio is in agriculture because of our mission, because of our target clients. Our target clients are the individuals that are underserved that would normally not open an account in the bank or would normally not afford a loan, taking a loan from the bank. So from that perspective, our big portfolio is in agriculture lending. And we have faced again and again delinquencies in this area due to external factors like the weather or soil exhaustion or cooperative wrangles and issues or lack of buyers and therefore dropping prices. And that has crippled the growth of agricultural lending. However, we continue in that space because of our mission. But for a person whose mission is not that target market, I would find it very difficult to encourage them to provide agri lending. But with the government initiatives, at least in Rwanda, with the government initiatives put in place, this should be more interesting. This should become attractive for financial services to provide lending in agriculture.
Thank you, Christine. You highlighted something, and I want to bring in a question online. There was a question raised here earlier around talent. There seems to be a disconnect during this period between staff, employer expectation, especially where staff perceive that recovery has actually occurred, but employers using it as an opportunity to optimize. Earlier, I think probably you mentioned that a lot of companies are going to have to rethink their talent strategy. What does that look like? And maybe as an addition to that one, from Waringa Kibe, what do you see the future of work and the potential for the worker, those that provide their skills and services online? What does that look like for the environment as we move post-COVID?
Okay, I think there are two questions in one there.
Yes.
The first one to deal with, as you've mentioned, around talent, that immediately when COVID kicked in, we saw a number of either layoffs that happened within organizations, or there was cutback on people's pay, or there was termination of certain contracts. So there were a number of initiatives that happened with these particular companies. And I think there's a lot of engagement that has to happen between employer and employees, and I think we've seen that at our workplace, for everyone to understand the current situation. And that's why when I was starting, I had to present the phases in which actually this COVID pandemic is going to roll out. That we had the first phase, which was more of containment. We got into the second phase, which was more of stability and where the companies are now. There's no way companies are going to start recruiting now or kind of readjusting their pay when they're into containment. If anything, if they're to rethink through their workforce, probably they're going to more of the contractual arrangement, the way the gig economy would work. And I think that's what your second question is alluding to, that where does the work come in? Companies are realizing that, do I need a full-time receptionist? Yet we're no longer having even people visiting our offices. Can I have a receptionist actually online? Okay. Companies are realizing, do I need all this office space if people are working from home? Can I empower my employees to work from home by providing more internet data and all these other facilities? I mentioned that there's so many sectors that are actually influencing even with the way the companies are working. If it so happens that the schools are going to be partly opened, or after the opening, and then we see individual schools saying, no, we can no longer have our children in school, but they're going to continue studying from home, what does it mean to the parent who's working? And which means that the parent has to spend more time at home. But then what does it mean to the employer who expects such a parent to come to work? So there has to be some kind of innovation by the employers where they will have to work where they will have to allow significant amount of time to the employees, probably to work from home, and cut back the level of employees expected within our traditional offices. So things are changing very, very fast. And if you are in service sector and you expect the level of productivity that you've had in the past, probably there has to be an adjustment to that effect. Of course, when it comes now to the employees, also the employees have to think through that we are very fast getting into the gig economy. And it's very important for an employee not to say, okay, fine, I'm tied to this employer. How else can I sell my skills? because now the field is open for where the skills can be actually. So there's so many people who would want part-time kind of working, even hourly based working arrangements. And that is becoming the reality. And I think it's for us to kind of change the mind in the way we've worked in the past and be open to those kind of slots of working, and probably to be a win-win for everyone, both the employer and the employee.
Thank you. Dan, maybe let me bring you in here, and just as a segue to what Fabi Rochelle was talking about, the gig economy, the new models of working. Across the world in more developed markets, there is the hourly work. You have young children from a high school, university doing hourly work and get paid hourly. Is there a position or a place for that here? Does the legislation need to change? How do businesses start to think, I can actually have someone here for a specific time, delivering specific outputs? Walk us through what that means for yourself.
Yes, I would say yes and no, because our labor laws do allow for you to give a contract of employment. It doesn't specify that the contract must be Monday to Friday. So you can actually have an employee, a part-time employee, but I know that that's a bit different from the gig workers per se. Our laws do provide for casual laborers, but again, it's sort of restricted for what would I call them, for casual jobs. I don't know if I use the word casual twice, if it makes sense. And I think what COVID should push the legislators to do is actually to change the laws to provide for sort of gig casual laborers, but not for casual work. So for gig workers, basically, for someone who is very skilled, but to only work for a few hours in a day. Because right now, I think the only way to do it is to have them work as consultants. But then again, when you come to the tax aspect of it, RA is always looking at consultants and see if they really are consultants or if they're just employees being called consultants. And that's because there's that gap for me to have an employee who is simply coming in 1 or 2 hours in a week, or just working offsite, but still fully under my control for that time. While the Revenue Authority deems a consultant as someone who is not in my control at all, but simply has outputs. So yes, we do need some changing of the laws to provide for gig workers. But at the moment, I can say the most straightforward way to do is to provide part-time contracts, although you will still have to pay the full pay-as-you-earn tax, the full social security for the amount of money that you're giving to this employee.
Thanks, Daniel. And of course, those kind of costs do impact our cash. I want to use that as a segue and put this to maybe Christine and Ben Michael. We're talking growth, and it is not difficult. It's difficult to not talk about the elephant in the room, cash flow. For every business, this is a lifeline, and we use that to pay salaries, suppliers, expenses in order to produce and serve our customers. Now, there's a saying I once heard: revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash flow is reality. Now, something else I've learned in the recent past is cash flow it's like a story made up of 4 chapters: your profit and loss, your working capital, assets, and funding. There's a question from Mike Semper. What advice would you give to SMEs in terms of managing liquidity, cash flow, that would allow them to cushion for any other disruptions, for growth? Because to be able to grow, you need cash flow. So what would you put to the SMEs and businesses on this webinar?
Yeah, thank you, Philip. My response goes to not only SMEs, even for banks and any institution. And as you put it, well, cash flow is reality. And for 2020, as economists are putting it, all wise individuals, that in 2020, nobody should be aiming at profitability. I'm sure that some will be profitable, but that should not be the aim. The aim will be to survive. And cash flow is one of the pillars for survival as a business. So what do you do as an SME or even as just an institution? The number one thing that we need to look at is study our liquidity stress. Look at it on a daily basis. How much cash do you have for the future, given very different scenarios? If there's zero increase in your cash, if there's 10% increase in your cash, you look at the stress on a daily basis so that you can you can stretch out and see how much cash you have in the future. That's one. Number two, cut costs. I know that sometimes you cut costs and you almost go up to the bone. It's okay. The bone can show. Cut costs up to the bone to make sure that only essential costs are being run in an institution, in an organization. And that includes taking on part-time staff and therefore reducing their pay, or it includes cutting on transportation if that has been a benefit for staff, making sure that since they will be working from home, that's not needed. So cutting costs is number two. Number three is access to affordable cash. Now, everyone in our market, especially in emerging markets, the only source of cash is loans. Going to a financial institution and getting a loan. And of course, there are loan sharks, individuals with very harsh conditions, but with cash that could give it to you. My advice would be to stay away from loan sharks, but go to your institution and instead of taking the loan, take a line of credit. A line of credit allows you to only use the line whenever you need it. And I hope that as you use it, it's because it's going to be a return. Make sure that every expense that you put out there has a return. In SME lending as well, for example, the supply chain has been affected. I've seen small businesses do their bulk purchases internally here in Rwanda. We have a few key wholesalers in the system. Some of the credit lines from those wholesalers are much better than getting a loan from the bank or using your line of credit. Those are the key things that come. And of course, the last piece is, get rid of unnecessary weight. Unnecessary weight includes excess staff, excess opening hours, excess expenses that you don't need. If you have a fleet of vehicles, pack them. If you don't want to sell them, make sure that you're saving on fuel. Go back to the basics. Remember the times when you started your business. When you started small and grew big, go back to that small time situation or state of affairs where you had lunch together instead of going to restaurants, where you bought big bottles of drinking water instead of the little bottles. Go back to the basics of where your business was at the beginning. That would be my input. I hand over to you, Ben Michael.
Ben Michael, can you hear us? Maybe while we get back, Ben Michael, I'll put a question to another one from the audience, from Jean Bosco Yacho. These are great insights, and a question would be, how do African businesses do better to prepare for future pandemics? Maybe I'll to add on to that one for yourself, Daniel. The current pressures have led to many businesses being forced to amend relationships with partners, suppliers, creditors, and others. What are their contracts as we know them going to change? What do we do as businesses to start to look at having clauses within our contracts to future-proof ourselves against shocks?
Should I answer both questions or just the second question?
Go ahead with the second one.
Okay.
Then I'll come back to it.
Oh, okay, cool. So the good news is that the force majeure clause, which really is the clause that you can use at this time to avoid liability, is already in our contract law. So to speak, we always had this in our contracts, because what Rwandan law provides is that if the law provides for something, it's an implied term in your contract, whether or not you have it, it really is there. But what you can do is, if you agree beforehand, you can actually agree to what exactly will happen, what procedures you will take in case of something like this ever happened again. So I'm talking the extreme, government has said you cannot go to the site and you're a construction company. What can you do? So if you only went with what is in the law, what the law will say is that there is no liability for you. You cannot be made to pay damages for late completion of your work, but it will not give you a procedure as to, so how long should we take before we actually fully terminate the contract? Should we wait 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Should we terminate it on the first day? What if government then says next week you can go back to the site? So my encouragement for everyone would be to just think, when you're having your contracts drafted, to just think of, you cannot think of every possible scenario, but you can, you can come up with some basic guidelines of what will happen in case we are not able to provide, what we're supposed to do tomorrow, of no fault of our own and no fault of yours. So if we can think through it now, and provide specific procedures as to how what we shall do when that day comes, then it will be much easier. Because for example, if I use what I talked about earlier, we have many landlords saying, yeah, I don't mind what government has said, but we had agreed you're going to be in this shop for 5 years.
Yes.
And yet I know he's saying, yes, government has said 15 days. You'll be here after day 15. But we don't really know. The 15 days are still going on up to today. And yet if you had something which said, if this event that stops me from going to my shop, continues for 15 days, on day 16, the contract shall terminate. Then
Correct.
It would have been a very easy, very straightforward.
Force majeure.
Yes, so the force majeure clause is there in the law, but in entering contracts, you need to make it more detailed as to what you will do. And that's the advice that I would give.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe Ben Michael, can we hear you now? Can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I'd like to bring you back in.
Can you hear me?
Again, yes, we can hear you. I'd like to bring you back in on cash. How do we manage cash? How do we conserve? Christine pointed out, cut down, go back to basics. How do we do that? And adding on a question to a comment onto that one from, I think it was Mark. As we cut costs, how do we still remain a people-centered business? Over to you.
That's very true, and I can never agree any stronger with Sister Christine, as she has put it. Yeah, cash is critical, and as someone put it, it's the bloodstream of an organization. I mean, if an organization doesn't have cash, then you're closing to bankruptcy. But that, in as much as it's critical, again, I like to say that as we craft all these responses, be they short-term or long-term, we need to put in place systems that make us practical and realistic, but also again, you need to make sure that those responses you put in place are your customer being at the center, people being at the center. Yes, their safety, their positioning, very, very important. Your customer and knowing how your customer is affected is very, very important. I like what our brother, the land friend, has put it. I mean, you're telling the landlord is telling the tenant that I don't care what the government has said, all right, you have to pay me for 15 days. But then the tenant is telling the landlord, how am I going to pay you? Because you see, my paying you really depends on me working, and when I work, I get some revenue, and then I pay you. How am I going to pay you? Okay, so now there's definitely going to be a critical balance, a critical balance. So in such a way that you ask yourself and say, yes, I'm going to cut down on costs. Yes, I'm going to make sure that I reserve the cash that I have so that it can sustain me to the next phase, which phase we talked about, the 3 phases. But at the same time, make sure that all those responses are well planned. All those responses are centered on people, the people who work for you, the people who employ you. And finally, they are geared to answering the critical question that your valued customer is asking you. If I may finalize with this, we have so much talked about cash, and I wanted to pick up the issue of the people affected because of this disruption. 9 times out of 10, let's admit that there are definitely people going to lose jobs, all right? Or the people who have already lost jobs. There are also organizations which are going to close. That brings me to a remembrance of the book of Psalms. David in Psalms chapter 3 cries and says, and again, I think this is very relevant because we're in a church setup. David in Psalms chapter 3, verse 1 to 3, cries and says, my enemies, O Lord, have increased. My enemies, O Lord, have increased in number. What do I do, O Lord? But I love the words that David said. He says, but you, O Lord, are my shield. But you, O Lord, are my shield. If you read back, David's enemies had increased to the extent of his own son, Absalom, wanting to take the throne of David. So he could have contended with any other enemies. He could have contended with any other person, but his own son wanted his throne. Ladies and gentlemen, we're faced with Covid-19. And there are certain things that are going to happen to us, and we'll say, oh my God, even my own employer has let me go. Even the person I expected to stand with me has let me go. I'd like to give you a message of hope. I'd like to give you a message of hope, like David cried and said, my enemies have increased in number, but you, oh Lord, are my shield. Maybe there is someone out there who has lost a job. Maybe there's someone out there who is about to close his business. Maybe there's someone out there who is almost seeing the ray of hope coming to a close. I'd like to tell you that our God is our shield. There is a but in everything. There definitely is a but in everything. And our God will make a way where there seems to be no way. Do not lose hope, because if you lose hope, you become hopeless. I urge you, I plead with you, I pray for you that do not lose hope. Do not lose hope. Our God is a God of but. There is a but coming your way. Thank you.
Thank you much,
Philip, would you
Ben.
allow me to quickly add on that
Sure.
question? How do you remain people-centered during this crisis? It was embedded in the questions you asked me and Ben Michael. The answer is be people-centered. Actually, it's almost as simple as that. When you're people-centered, everything you do centers on those people, whether it's your employees or your clients. Struggling with whether you want to be people-centered or not is a reality. Some businesses struggle with it, yes, but if you truly want to be people-centered, be people-centered. Put them at the center of every decision you're making. If you're a Christian, and I hope that most of us on the call are Christians here, and even if you're not, pray that God puts the people at the center of your heart. Once it's within your heart, then it flows out naturally. Are you revising your policies? People come first. Are you thinking of pricing your products differently? People come first because you're the center of your heart. It's not an issue that you can put on and off. Do not wear people-centeredness as a hat that could easily go off when it gets very hot. But if it's in your heart, you will be people-centered. And if we don't know how to be people-centered, like Ben Michael said, let's pray and ask God to give us that wisdom to know how to be centered. Let's research, let's look at other institutions that are Christ-centered. How did they get there? It's probably a journey if you're just beginning, but it's a journey that will give you incredible benefits, because once you have people at the center of everything you're doing, they are the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that bring businesses to you. They're the ones that could actually run you down or make you profitable. So employees are probably the biggest casualty of the current events, but if they know they're at your heart, they will stand with you during the crisis, and so will our clients.
Thank you, Christine. Moving forward, still sticking with people and keeping people at the center. Daniel, I want to bring you in here. Let's talk about the health aspect of employees. As many of us see them coming back, is there room for liability? If they came back and they caught it at our premises, is our employers liable? How do we address the mental health issues? They are now still working for these companies, but at home, and this is a different environment. This is a question from the audience, from Ruth Mutoni, around how do we deal with people that are in panic and stress, and what the process of bringing them back.
Okay, I'll start with the first thing. I think for workplace liability for COVID, and recalling that COVID is a very new issue that has not been thought about before. I think if I look at the regulations, I mean the ministerial,
Directives.
what the directives right now, I wouldn't see any liability on the workplace, because right now it's still personal about how do I protect myself. I need to wash my hands. I need to cover myself with a mask, unless someone can really prove that there's a workplace that has no hand sanitizers. There's a workplace where they did not make any they did not distance us. They kept us very squeezed, and they insisted that we have to come to work. I did not have the option of working at home. And when I go to work, I could not use my mask or something like that. If it's very, very evident that the workplace was not doing what the government has required of workplaces to do, then you can put some sort of liability on the workplace. But I think for COVID right now, it's more personal. And but because if you look at workplace liability, or not COVID, for other things, it usually is as a result of your activities at the workplace. So I'm working with a machine and the machine has cut me, or it's not something that has come from someone else had a flu and now the flu has gotten to me, so the workplace is liable. So it's not easy for me to give you a direct answer, because it's something that's very novel. But I'll draw the line at has the workplace done the minimum that is required of it by the ministerial directives? If yes, and if you still get COVID after that, I do not see liability on the workplace.
Okay.
And then the second question was about mental health. And how do you do it? Sorry, just repeat that question again. The
question from Ruth Mutoni was, how do we deal with mental health repercussions regarding what is happening in the post-pandemic era?
I think for that, I would go back to what Christine was talking about employers being people-centered in terms of the employees rather than maybe the clients. Employers have to realize that this has taken a huge toll on employees, actually on themselves as well. The uncertainty is really great. You do not know if you will have your job tomorrow. You do not know if there'll be a contract, there'll be a company to work for tomorrow. And I think employers need to realize that if an employee is dealing with this, then they need to understand and they need to treat them with carefully and not just brush it off. And I think employees should also be open to inform their employers when they feel like it is having an impact on them that goes beyond just the normal, so that they can be given the space that they need, they can be given the understanding that they need, so that they could be able to work, to work back to what they were before. And maybe, as you know, our laws require all employers to provide health insurance for employees, and that hasn't changed even in COVID. And mental health issues are health issues just like any other. And if you need to seek help as well. And employers should understand that employees can seek help for this.
Thank you, Daniel. Frobisher, one for you.
Philip, can I?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, Christine.
sorry, Philip. Can I just share an example of how we have tried to go ahead of mental health issues for our staff at Urwego Bank. We maybe most of the businesses are not the size of Urwego, or some are even 10 times larger. But what we did at the beginning of COVID-19, we put together all the senior managers, everyone that holds a title of a manager, and we divided the branches and number of staff among each one of them. And then we tasked them with calling them every week to make sure that you're talking about everything else other than business. Do not talk about Urwego clients, do not talk about anything else other than how that staff is doing, how their family is doing. And then me as CEO, I was tasked to call those senior leaders to find out what has happened. What helped, and I know that this might not be possible for many organizations, but if you can, when you make it personal, there are personal meetings or personal calls, then the staff, the employees are willing to share with you. One thing we discovered is that if we had not put that mechanism in place, most of them were not going to share with us how they are struggling because of the fear that there was, cutting staff, cutting number of staff that was coming up. And so they were afraid, if I share that I'm struggling, maybe I might be put on the list of the people to be let go. But putting aside let going or reducing staff, which is inevitable for some businesses, we were able to speak with them, we were able to pray with them. For Christians, we were able to hear how they're doing, how they and their families are doing. Because if a spouse is struggling, if a parent is struggling, it affects your employee, and that employee brings it to work. And if it's not talked about, then it affects their productivity. So putting a mechanism in place, slashing down the official meetings and touch points, and actually becoming personal also helps with the staff. And we were able to pray with a lot of them, and that has helped. And that helps us as well, even us who give. It was given back to us, because then as you hear other people, you pray for them, sometimes they even pray for you. And that helps with, averaging or leveling out the mental anguish or unknowns and certainties that we're all dealing with. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd like
thanks,
to submit, Philip, let me just affirm what Christine has mentioned.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it being the strongest institution, it being the strongest nation, it being the strongest relationship, if communication upward the ladder or downward from the ladder is not clear, that institution, that nation, or probably that relationship is bound to break. And so I'd like to submit again that even during this week of COVID, during this time of COVID, as organizations, as businesses, we ought to try as much as is possible to improve our communication, both within ourselves as a team, and again, out of the team to our customers and the surrounding environment. Because 9 times out of 10, if we communicate, no one will create their own paradigm that something is bound to happen. If we communicate, we understand each other. If we communicate, we know what is happening. If we communicate, nothing comes as a surprise. So I pray and I request and I urge that as organizations, as businesses, if it is possible, so far as it may be, let's improve our communication levels. Let's try as far as it's possible to break the barriers that there be. Make sure that your door is open as a CEO for anyone to come in and have an interaction with you. Make sure that your door is open as a manager for anybody to come in and interact with you as far as it is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben Michael. I think something that I see a common theme is people are our biggest assets, and it needs to be people focused if we are looking at growth. But one of the things that has hit our world post-COVID is the fact that today, right now, we are online. If this had happened, or this meeting was supposed to happen about 6 months ago, we'd probably be in a room together. We are online. Digital has changed our world forever. Frobisher, I'd like to bring you back in here. How do businesses, I mean, when you look at the world today, the pace of automation and digitalization has increased, and no industry has been left out. How do businesses in Rwanda, across the world, position for growth in this new digital world? What do you do? I think there's an interesting meme about who impacts your digital strategy. Is it the CEO, the CIO, or COVID? COVID today has hit many people. Could you come in and tell us how businesses position for growth?
Okay, yeah, and Phil, thank you. And I want to approach that question in two parts. First of all, we have to be very, very careful before even you jump into digitizing the business. Of course, what we are saying that as part of the transformation, we should move into trying to change our models, and part of the modeling of business is digitizing the structured businesses. But you need to, first of all, ask yourself whether the business is ready for that digitization. At PwC, we have what we call the 7 archetypes of businesses during COVID. And these 7 archetypes include what you call the surfers. And these are guys who have been hit by COVID, but for some reason, they have continued to work well. And this is why you see the high-tech companies. They have continued to work well, either through the delivery or the online kind of businesses. You have the ascenders, you have the fighters, you have the rebounders, you have the strugglers, and the weakened, and you have the doomed. So you have to take a reality check. Where do I fall within these particular archetypes? If I find myself that I'm doomed, I'm weakened, probably there's no even business for you to invest into digitization. We always kind of then recommend that you deal with the upper 4 types of archetypes. You deal with the strugglers, the rebounders, and the ascenders and the surfers for you to go into digitization. So that's a very, very important point, because the more I listen to this conversation, even someone who entered COVID when they were struggling, and COVID went ahead to accelerate the downfall, seems to be going back to flog the horse that is already dead. So yet the strategy would be, don't try to get good money, chasing bad money. And actually the strategy for most of the doomed and the weakened is that drop it and then you get into a new business. And it's very, very important, whoever is listening in, to look at those archetypes, map where their businesses are, and see whether they fall into the above 4 or they fall into the 5 and 6 and 7. Let's assume that you're actually a surfer, or you're an ascender, or you're a fighter, or a rebounder. Then how do we introduce digitization? It's very, very critical. And I think studies have carried out that, for example, 90% of the cyber crimes that we are having there as a result of human error. Why is it a result of human error? Is because people are not skilled enough to actually deal with the digital elements of the business. So it's very, very critical that you actually upskill the stuff that you're using. There's what you call digital fitness for your employees. So before you think about having the fancy and everything that is required to make the business digitized, you need to upskill the people who are going to use the tools. Otherwise, we've been organizations that have spent billions and billions on infrastructure around technology, but they can't use it. So you have a very, very expensive tool within the organization, but they don't even use 5% of it. So it's very important that the employees are upskilled. And when they're actually skilled, it's interesting that they themselves come up with certain digital solutions that you don't necessarily need to actually procure out, but they're internally developed. And we see it in our own organization, that we went on almost a 2-year digitization, whereby each staff is required to have a certain score every quarter of his digital fitness. And you see really what happens within these particular employees. that they are more prone to driving this digital agenda as opposed to having it a top-down kind of element to employees. Once you have the infrastructure that is needed within the organization, then it makes sense for you to go all out. What I'm saying now is that because of COVID, there's some kind of reaction element within organizations. And the first two elements that I've talked about, organizations ignore them and immediately dive into digitizing the businesses, which of course is okay, but you're doing it on a very, very wrong foundation. And probably the investment you're putting in, you may not realize it because you've missed the first two elements.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. While I have you there is a question here I'd like to bring on taxation. What do you see as the tax of the future?
Yeah.
How will governments support, that will support government revenue, and why? What does it look like in the future? How do they sustain a more, provide for a more sustainable recovery? What does that look like? Do we see ourselves changing? Does the government, is there opportunity to look inward at a more sustainable? Could you shed light on that one, that aspect?
Okay, interesting question. And I think you've seen what has happened within the region. And different governments have approached this, the tax regulation or the tax regime differently. Rwanda has been extremely, very, very careful. If you look at the tax laws and regulations, they have not changed, despite the fact that we've had a number of cabinet submissions. I do recall the time when the lockdown had just started. That was the time when the government was putting together its budget for FY 2021. And you can imagine where you've been budgeting, and part of your significant budget as government actually is tax collection, but all of a sudden then you need to really cut back.
Yeah.
I remember around that time we did make 7 propositions to government to just help the private sector kind of sail through during this particular COVID-19. And out of 7, government did approve 4 of them. 2 of them were rejected and 1 is still pending. And I can run through these some of these propositions that we asked. We asked government that, first of all, everyone was being kind of following papers. You know that at one point government was owing private sector almost 40 billion in terms of VAT refunds. We asked government that the first thing that you need to do is to expedite refunding of this particular amounts that have been owing for almost 3 years. And the government accepted to that, and they went ahead and they did a number of refunds to small businesses. Why was that important? It was important that businesses didn't have cash flow, what you've been talking about. They were struggling, but money was sitting somewhere. And government priority kind of changed. So that came through. The second thing we asked government is that, you see, most of these businesses, the way they work is that when I issue an invoice to you, that's when I'm expected to pay VAT, despite the fact that I've received the money. So meaning that during this period, there's not going to be cash, but business is going to go on. And we are expected to actually pay, despite the fact that I've not received. Yeah. We asked government to change the tax points for VAT. This is one of the elements that they rejected, but it's still being considered. And the main reason was, how do I know that now you've received the money? So the operational aspect is a problem. They saw the point that businesses should not be paying tax where they have not received cash, but implementing it was a problem. So, and that's kind of being something that's being considered. The third element was around helping reduce the taxes on sectors that have been hit. That was tourism, schools, and teachers. And I think you saw an exemption on POI for certain thresholds of employees. Then there was another one that was to deal with help businesses so that they don't have to pay provisional taxes, yet this year they are likely not to earn. And again, government came out, they decided to sacrifice your provisional taxes are going to be based on current year income and not last year income. Okay. There's of course a drastic one that we asked, which was, can you defer POI at least for the period of COVID? And that was outrightly rejected. But to get back to your question, that if you look at all those initiatives that government is putting in, how are they going to then realize revenue?
Yeah.
because it's seemingly that they are cutting back, and it's very, very evident within our budget that they expect revenue contribution to GDP is going to drop from almost 16% to about 14%. And that is going to take another 3 years to build up. But if you've realized what government has been investing in the last 2 to 3 years, it has been around indirect taxes. And these indirect taxes are VAT, withholding tax, and customs tax. And that's where the tax of the future is. Tax of the future is in indirect taxes and local government tax. So you saw government invested a lot in mapping all the titles and properties, and beginning of 2019, we see property taxes being paid. But at the same time, they have invested a lot in the EBM system, which is supposed to be an automatic way of collecting tax. And that's why the government is seeing where the tax of the future is. Right. Yes, we're going to see less reduction in CIT, PAYE, because that's more of a natural tax, and they focus more on collecting on VAT and all these other local government taxes. And whenever we meet businesses, we tell them that you have to be extremely very compliant when it comes to these areas.
Yeah. Probisha, thank you. Thank you.
Allow me to come in here, Philip.
Yes.
To just give a feedback on the incentives and how government has responded in terms of tax. Again, I'm speaking as a business person. There's nothing as good as feeling while running business that the regulator, in this case, who is the tax collector, is actually working with you in this problem. That assures the taxpayer, that assures the taxpayer, even as much as we are planning to do our businesses, that actually the tax collector is working along with you. So I like to commend Rwanda Revenue Authority, that they have actually done very, very well. The Rwanda Revenue Authority has done very, very well in as much as is possible to relate, to interact, and to communicate with the taxpayers. And if you communicate, if you relate, if you communicate and relate with the taxpayer, then you will feel comforted. You'll feel comforted, so much so that at the time of enforcement or the time of paying, there is communication. In as much as is possible, if you fail to pay, maybe because of cash flow reasons, the door has been open at Rwanda Revenue Authority for them to welcome you and communicate with you and talk to you and make sure that you explain to them what it is you're going through, and they have listened. So we commend them, and we commend what the government has done in as much as is possible to use private sector federation to communicate with us in the business world, explaining to us why these incentives have been put in place, explaining to us why these taxes have been put in place, and that has played a vital and important role. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben Michael. Now, we have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to, that's why they say you leave the best for last. Christine, there's one that a lot of people would like to know. At the start of the lockdown, Central Bank came in and they allowed for banks to help their customers, restructuring, providing a facility for that. More recently, the government has now put in place a recovery fund of $100 million, again, through participation through local banks. Could you tell us more about it, how businesses on this webinar can benefit, who it benefits, and what are the advantages, disadvantages? I'll just leave that to you.
Unmute. Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a good question. And I hope that every listener is approaching their bank to find out what they're eligible for and what they can apply for. The Economic Resilience Fund, to my surprise, was it's supposed to be money to help the government run the country, especially in the wake of reduced taxes and government expenses that stay the same. And yet the government made a decision to make this a recovery fund for businesses, because as you boost SMEs and MSMEs, then you're boosting the revenue for the government. And so the hindsight behind the recovery plan or recovery relief fund is to make sure that the business is uplifted. Now, the criteria is easy. It's been summarized. It's within every bank. If you hold an SME loan or an asset loan, especially in the hotel business, if you have an agriculture loan, you reach out to your bank. Now, the proportions are different. A proportion has been set aside for agriculture, for hotel industry or service industry and tourism, and then SME working capital. What happens is that the gap that you have between running your government and actually access to finance is what the government relief fund will provide. They will provide the funds to help you continue running your business at a reduced interest rate. I will not go into details here. What that means is that your bank would give you a grace period if you need it. They will give you access to that subsidized interest loan, and you will pay it in a specific amount of time. If it's for working capital at a reduced rate, I'm sure that it would boost your business to move forward. However, the caution is there's no disadvantage to this fund, but there's a caution to the businesses. If you're struggling, and if additional capital is not actually what you need, if what you need is clients, if what you need is a supply of your inputs, if what you need is experienced staff, if what you need is that, the Resilient Fund will not help you. You still need to take care of all those other things that you need as inputs in your business. But if your limitation or challenges are cash-based, like purchasing or rental expenses or employee expenses, then reach out to the relief fund, and you'll be told how it works in your favor or not in your favor. Every bank is handling it differently, and we are praying that a lot more in the service industry, especially tourism and hotels, reach out to your bank so that your loans are restructured, so that they are rescheduled, and that you have refinancing from that fund. It is incredibly important that the SME businesses use this fund, because if it goes to waste and businesses close down, the government will have done everything they can, and we will have failed ourselves. And so businesses, reach out to your personal bankers and know a lot about this Resilient Fund. Or if need be, if there's additional need, maybe we can organize another webinar when we specifically focus on the relief fund that the government has put in place for Rwandan market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm very cognizant that there's just a bit more, just a few minutes left. And I think a couple of takeaways for me that I see. People first, people first, people first.
Very true.
The next one is learning how to preserve cash, cut your costs, go back to basics. We need to grow, but to do that, we need to take a step back, go back to basics. The other one is from Frobisher, digitize only if really you are in that segment of the four that he described. I'd like to ask each of our panelists, as the audience, and we've had a very engaged audience, and a big thank you to everyone who's logged on from wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I'd like to ask each of our panelists before we close, one word that you leave for our audience, one takeaway that you'd like them to remember. I'll start with you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think for me, the lesson for everyone, for business owners, should be the importance of contract drafting. Contracts are drafted in a time of agreement between parties, in a time of happiness, but you should always, at the back of your mind, have the worst scenarios possible in mind, and draft your contract, because you never know what could happen. So take care of both the aspects that could go wrong in the contract itself, but also the externalities, such as pandemics, etc. And also always be willing to make concessions in the event of something like this, so that contracts can actually be concluded, if indeed they can be concluded, And if they cannot, please be willing and please be accepting to terminate a contract, whether or not it's really, sometimes it's really emotional and painful, but yeah, the cost of staying in, especially, could be higher. So yeah, that's the takeaway I could give in terms of contracts, and in terms of employees, I would say, and employment issues, I would say the Rwandan labor law is not very complicated. It's on the internet. Read it, get used to it, get to know what you can do and what you cannot do. Because even in instances like COVID, something I forgot to mention earlier was the procedures you use to terminate employees, even during such a time, matter. If you terminate them using wrong procedures, it doesn't matter if the substance for which you terminated them is right, it amounts to unlawful termination. So you need to know both the reasons and the procedures for termination. So get a good lawyer or get to know the laws yourself. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Frobisher, one last word, your thoughts to the audience.
Yeah, and I'll be a good student and try to do exactly one word. Yeah, I think my thought would be the quote that I started with, that in the middle of difficult lies opportunities. And I encourage businesses that even as we go into this crisis, as it evolves, try to look for those opportunities that present themselves. For Rwanda, we are seeing government putting resources behind the economic recovery, and seize those opportunities so that you can utilize them within your business.
Thanks, Frobisher. Christine, one word of advice.
Yeah, one word, Philip, is trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding or your own plans or your own strategies. Do not be tempted to include the Lord in your plans. Rather, go to the Lord and acknowledge him in all your ways, plans, and strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Ben Michael, one last word.
One last word. Both business owners and business leaders, people in government, let us put people at the center of everything we're going to do. And finally, the big book says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. It took the death of King Uzziah for him to see the Lord. It could have taken the coming of COVID-19 for you to see the light. Hang in there. Hang in there. Soon you're going to see the light. Do not give up. Don't you ever lose hope. Our God is a God of but. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben Michael. And to all our audiences, as I said at the beginning, it is an amazing panel that we've been able to get here. I so have enjoyed working with people smarter than myself. And I hope you can surround yourself with people that are smart to, as you, Christine said, seeking the Lord into your business. As Daniel said, seek out good lawyers. As Frobisher said the same thing. I'd like to ask Ben Michael, as we conclude this, first, a big thank you to the leadership at CLA and to the business advisory team for putting this together. Many thanks to everyone for dialing in. Ben Michael, would you close us with a word of prayer as we conclude this?
Thank you very much. As we conclude, let me also make this known to everybody there. The leadership of CLA has set up a team of people who are here to support, to stand, and to listen to everyone out there, especially business people who are struggling. And we would like to thank, we are very proud of our leadership at CLA for them to have thought about this during this time. There is a team of people who have been put in place, and we are there to listen. We are there to work with you. We probably may not have all the solutions, but we are there to work with you. And we've been doing this. We want to thank our chairperson, the gentleman called Mr. Eugene Haguma, who has done a fantastic job to steer us through, to listen to all these businesses that have been struggling. And so if you're out there and you're a CLA member and you're running business, and probably even when you're not a CLA member and you're running a small business and you don't have anyone to talk to, we're out here. Attend to the, come to church. Church will let you know how to get in touch with this committee, and the committee will certainly work with you. Let us pray, shall we? Father God, in the name of Jesus, thank you. Thank you, and affirming Christine's word that let us not lean on our understanding. Let us pray that in all our ways, even our strategic ways in business, even our strategic ways in government, whatever we do, Lord of Father, let's lean on your understanding, because you are the best. You are the Alpha and the Omega. You are the beginning and the end. And so we commit to you, even people who are out there struggling, people who have lost their jobs, people who are seeing the ray of hope blinking and running away. That you, O Lord, the God of bat, like David cried and said, but you, O Lord, are my shield. May you be their shield. May you continue to be our shield in business. And may you continue to be our shield as a nation of Rwanda. We thank you for the leadership. Continue to give them insight, continue to give them wisdom, knowledge, and understanding as they approach this global challenge. Thank you, O Lord, for CLA. We bless you for the leadership in CLA, for having put up this. And for everybody who participated, bless them, dear Lord. We thank you. In Jesus' name we prayed and believed. Amen.
Amen. To all the panelists, thank you very much. And everyone who's dialed in, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and God bless.
Bless you.